moving out of the preliminaries and the polls and on to the people and the voting. How will you decide on a candidate? This is the CitizenLink Report. I'm Stuart Shepard, along with my friend and colleague, Tom Minnery, who's the Executive Director of CitizenLink. Hi, Tom.
Hi, Stuart.
We want to do what we can to help people make up their minds who to support. We're talking specifically here about the GOP primary because obviously President Obama is the person so far on the other side. And it's been fascinating to watch. We want to give people what insights we can. First question for you. Why have there been so many different leaders in this? Every time a different poll comes out, it seems like a different name has floated to the top. They rocket up there, and then they're gone 2 weeks later.
Well, different reasons for different candidates, but essentially, it's the debates which are highlighting people's abilities and drawing interest in candidates. Then when someone gets into the lead, the other candidates begin directing ground fire, so to speak, local television ads in individual states against that person, and that tends to drive down one's lead if one cannot respond in kind. So there are a lot of local dynamics at work as well as national dynamics, but it's all very, very preliminary, and as you say, we're about to get into a new phase here.
Do you also think as people look across the field, they see things they like in more than one person? I mean, they like this combination of attributes in this one and this combination over here.
Well, absolutely they do, and the big dividing line is, do I choose a candidate who best represents my views, or do I represent a candidate who best represents my views who can win?
And Tom, even those of us who follow this, I mean, I have a hard time. I don't think I could tell you right now how many debates there have actually been in this. There have been so many. Do you think the sheer number of them helped the candidates, or did it hurt them, or maybe a little of both?
Well, there have been a lot of them. I think there have been about 12 so far, and they continue on into January.
I want you to notice he said about 12, just to be clear. Okay, go ahead.
They continue on into January and February at the same pace, but they've been drawing large audiences, and I think they highlight the articulate lineup of candidates trying to get the Republican Party's nomination. It's a very strong lineup of people, and the debate format serves well one particular candidate's strength, and that is Newt Gingrich, who's a professor and who has deep knowledge of American history as well as constitutional issues, been on the scene so long. And let's play one clip in which Megyn Kelly asks Newt Gingrich a question and he responds, and there's a very interesting historical knowledge that Newt Gingrich brings to play that most candidates would not be able to bring to play.
Voters. Speaker Gingrich, let me start with you. You have proposed a plan to subpoena judges to testify before Congress about controversial decisions that they make. In certain cases, you advocate impeaching judges or abolishing courts altogether. Two conservative former attorneys general have criticized your plan, saying it alters the checks and balances of the three branches of government. Now, they used words like dangerous, outrageous, and totally irresponsible. Are they wrong?
Well, the first half is right. It alters the balance because the courts have become grotesquely dictatorial, far too powerful, and I think, frankly, arrogant in their misreading of the American people. There's an entire paper at newt.org. I've been working on this project since 2002 when the Ninth Circuit Court said that one nation under God is unconstitutional in the Pledge of Allegiance. And I decided if you had judges who were so radically anti-American that they thought one nation under God was wrong, they shouldn't be on the court. Now, I taught a short course in this at the University of Georgia Law School. I testified in front of sitting Supreme Court justices at Georgetown Law School, and I warned them, you keep attacking the core base of American exceptionalism, and you are going to find an uprising against you, which will rebalance the judiciary. We have a balance of three branches. We do not have a judicial dictatorship in this country, and that's what the Federalist Papers promised us. And I would, just like Jefferson, Jackson, Lincoln, and FDR, I would be prepared to take on the judiciary if, in fact, it did not restrict itself in what it was doing.
What of the former attorneys general? These are conservative former attorneys generals who have criticized the plan, as I say, dangerous, ridiculous, outrageous, yes, totally irresponsible.
Sure. I'd ask, first of all, have they studied Jefferson, who in 1802 abolished 18 out of 35 federal judges? 18 out of 35 were abolished.
Something that was highly criticized.
Not by anybody in power in 1802. Jefferson himself is asked, is the Supreme Court supreme? And he said, that is absurd. That would be an oligarchy. Lincoln repudiates the Judge Scott decision in his first inaugural address in 1861 and says, no 9 people can make law in this country. That would be the end of our freedom. So I would suggest to you, actually, as a historian, I may understand this better than lawyers. And as lawyers, those 2 attorneys general are behaving exactly like law schools, which have overly empowered lawyers to think that they can dictate to the rest of us.
So that's an example of the kind of repartee that Newt Gingrich is so good at.
All right. And it can also be hard on a candidate, especially if someone asks them a very specific question about a specific issue, something you got to do in Des Moines, asking Ron Paul about the life issue.
We have to remember, when we tend to nationalize things, we expose ourselves to great danger, because when they make a mistake, it's national. This is the reason that we had Roe versus Wade. They should have never heard that case. They nationalized it. So I'm very cautious about nationalizing these laws. So it would be much better to state when life begins, make the law enforcement at the state level, which has been traditional. But it should not be that we enforce this law at the national level, but there's no reason why we can't define when life begins.
But if they nationalize the problem, why is it wrong to nationalize the solution?
Well, and I would be glad to do that. And the solution, it would have been solved 10 years ago, because I've been pushing a law that could have been passed by majority vote when we had the House and the Senate and the presidency.
What that clip illustrates is how a pro-life candidate, and Ron Paul is pro-life, frustratingly can be against the very solution to the problem of abortion. His principle is for states to handle these things, not to nationalize the problem, as he put it, even though a national solution is the only one possible, because that bill that he spoke about could not pass a Senate because it would be filibustered by the Democrats if it ever got to the Senate. So you really need a national, a federal pro-life amendment of some kind.
Now, we've gotten quite a few emails from our viewers, and one of the common questions that we get is, why don't you just support this candidate? And then they go on to explain why they feel that that's the one that best represents the point of view. I should point out that those emails we get pick different candidates. They don't all pick the same one. They haven't identified the same one. And I'm sure they can argue very strongly for the candidate. They're very supportive of it. I guess in general, the question would be, why haven't evangelical leaders said, here's one that we can support as Christian organizations?
Well, it's precisely for the same reason. The Christian evangelical leaders are all over the map. I've been at this a while now, and a lot of us got together in 2000 and tried to unite behind one candidate. It did not work. We tried again in 2008 when there was an open presidency, no incumbent running. Tried, and with some frustration were unable to do it, and a group just met recently to try to do the same thing for 2012. It's a spectrum. For example, on one end of the spectrum are leaders who say, I want the candidate who best represents Christian values and who is a strong Christian. All the way down the spectrum to people who say, I'll take the candidate who comes closest to my ideals, but who can win in November. And whether you are on the one part of the spectrum that says purity, and we'll leave it up to the Lord to push this guy through, or all the way down to those who say politics is worldly, it can be dirty, it's almost a contact sport, and it's going to take a lot of hard work. Who can win? It's a spectrum, and that's why, and where people are on that spectrum depends on how long they've been paying attention to national politics, how well they know the individual candidates. Personal friendships play a lot in this situation. So on and on it goes, but it's why one just has to leave it up to the voters in the end.
And it's a good conversation for us to have and to work through that in our own minds, in our own hearts. What do we think about that? So we ask you to take some time, ponder that, and think about it. Will the primary campaign be decided on Super Tuesday? It's in March this year. 10 states will be either having caucuses or primaries on that day. Will that be the turning point for this whole thing?
Likely not. For this reason, the Republican National Committee has adopted a new scheme for awarding the votes to the individual candidates depending on how well they do in the primaries. It's not a winner-take-all series of primaries now. It's proportional votes according to how well each candidate has done in each individual state. So a candidate can come in second or third and keep going long enough to amass a good number of seconds and thirds to be a contender all the way into the late spring.
So if the number one spot is a different person each time, but one of the candidates manages to be second every time, that actually could be a winning strategy?
It could be, yeah.
All right. And any final encouragement from you before I let you go on this final CitizenLink report of 2011?
Well, there's nothing more deserving of prayer and careful thought and calm discussion than who ought to be the President of the United States. It's a very, very important time in the history of the country that we're getting into. So please be in prayer about it.
All right. Thank you, Tom, and thanks to all of you who join with us in these conversations each week. Now, we're going to take a break until the first Wednesday in January, right after New Year's. We're going to do a special version of the CitizenLink report talking about the Iowa caucuses and what the results are there. We ask you to pray for the nation, pray for Americans, and particularly evangelical Christians as we all work through this process of figuring out which person we would like to support, and as we all decide which of the candidates across the spectrum are the ones that we think would be worthy of our vote. And remember, stand tall and be heard.